In the peaceful village of Krulo, a girl had taken a shovel to dig up a grave and retrieve bones, wanting to conduct a DNA test to find out if her younger brother had truly died. That morning, she had accidentally encountered a figure that looked remarkably like her younger brother. However, the truth was that her brother had died 20 years ago, and she had seen his corpse with her own eyes. He couldn't be alive now. Yet, she could not have imagined that her brother was indeed still alive. But the thing is, back then, he could only drink human blood to sustain his life. But the important thing was that inside this village, there was a secret that terrified others. Just a few days earlier, on a foggy morning, two men had gone to Lake Oder, located between the borders of Germany and Poland, to fish. But when they passed by a forest, they saw a corpse in the mud ahead. They looked up, and a mountain of bodies appeared right before their eyes. The horrifying sight terrified them, and they ran away in fear. Shortly after, local police quickly cordoned off the scene and began an investigation. Upon examining the pile of bodies, they found hundreds of skeletons, including human and animal remains. Strangely, the rate of decomposition varied greatly among the bodies, indicating that the time of their murders spanned several decades. After some time, the police discovered a corpse that had not yet decomposed, resembling a Polish person. Consequently, Germany and Poland dispatched inspectors to assist the local police with the investigation. The German inspector, named Roland, came from a small village near the site of the discovery. Although he had not returned home for many years, Roland was still familiar with the area. The German security agency had sent him back to aid in the investigation, along with a Polish inspector named Zajac. When the two arrived at the scene, Zajac suddenly asked Roland about a case that had occurred in 1997, known as Case Number 97. This case had been handled by Roland's father years ago when Roland had just become a police officer. That was why Zajac wanted to know if Case Number 97 was related to the pile of bodies. Roland was silent for a moment, then said that in July 1997, the Oder River had flooded, and 3 people went missing. 2 weeks later, they found a body among them. The body was the younger brother of Kai, Roland's colleague Magdalena at the time. The other 2 people still had not been found, and since the case had dragged on for so long, they ultimately had no choice but to close it. Roland also left his hometown shortly after, and had heard that his colleague Magdalena had quit her job and left. While they were talking, the 2 of them arrived at the scene. At that moment, the forensic officer was still diligently investigating the clues. Zajac and Roland walked in to view the pile of bodies, and then went to speak with the officer in charge for more details. The officer explained that the bodies had only recently been piled up, and that the site where they were found was an abandoned farm. The owner of the farm was Magdalena's father. His name was Arthur. He didn't want his farm to be sealed off, so he had been holding a gun and forcing the police to leave. It was unclear whether the bodies were connected to him. The police had also contacted Magdalena, hoping she could return and convince her father to cooperate with the investigation. Calculating the time, she had now returned. Magdalena was returning to her hometown after many years. At that moment, Roland and Zajac were interrogating 2 witnesses, who were the 2 fishermen. However, they had only passed by and had no clues whatsoever. During the interrogation, a gunshot was heard from outside. After stepping out, the officer in charge told Roland that the gunshot was fired by Arthur, who had used this method to drive everyone away. As a result, the police had to take stronger measures, which involved launching an assault on Arthur's house. When the special forces took their positions, a fierce battle was about to begin. At this point, Roland brought Magdalena here, knowing that the only way to avoid further conflict was to ask her for help, since they had once been close friends. Magdalena seemed to have been away from home for a long time. Upon entering the house, which felt both strange and familiar to her, she found her mother there. However, her mother didn't seem happy to see her, and criticized her for coming back. After saying that, her mother no longer paid any attention to her. Magdalena didn't get angry, but went upstairs to find her father. He also didn't acknowledge her presence. After a while, Magdalena came back outside and said she had convinced her parents to leave, so there was no need for force. Although it was unclear what exactly she had said to them, her expression revealed that she was not in a good mood. Due to Arthur's provocations with the gun and the discovery of numerous bodies on his farm, he became the primary suspect. He was taken to the interrogation room for questioning. The police conducted a thorough search of the entire house. Under Zajac's interrogation, Arthur revealed everything he knew. From 1999 until now, he hadn't cultivated anything on his farm, and had not been there again since then. Even though the house was not far from the farm, his eyesight was poor, and even with glasses, he couldn't clearly see anything more than 10 meters away. Although his hearing was still fine, he hadn't heard any unusual sounds recently, so he didn't know anything about the bodies found. Zajac didn't press further on this, but brought up a case from 1947. According to Polish police records, over 50 years ago, after a flood in the Oder River, 2 bodies were washed up on the shore. Arthur was only 22 years old at the time. Through forensic examination, it was determined that the 2 individuals had drowned, but there were suspicions that it was a murder, and a suspect had even been identified. Zajac discovered that one of the suspects was Arthur, and so Zajac asked him to explain this. Arthur explained explained that the two who drowned had worked on his farm, so it was natural for him to be suspected. However, he insisted that he had nothing to do with their deaths. Zajac pointed out that the police records were missing the name of the other suspect, asking Arthur if he knew who it was. After thinking for a moment, Arthur said that he didn't know. The interrogation ended, and Arthur was released, but the police decided to keep him under surveillance for his protection. As the police examined each of the bodies from the pile, they discovered something crucial. One of the bodies was the same as a missing person from case number 97. Upon further investigation, the police immediately called for a meeting. Based on the information they had, they could now estimate the time of death of these bodies, which appeared to have been spread out over the course of 50 years. Among them were also animal carcasses. Although they couldn't be sure of the killer's motive yet, some of the bodies had already been identified. Arthur, the farm owner, despite his old age and frailty, could not escape suspicion. However, given his age and health condition, Arthur had little chance of being involved in the murder, nor could he transport the bodies in mud. The presence of animal remains made it even more difficult to identify the culprit and the motive behind the crime. Up until then, the only common factor found in the autopsies was that they had all been bled. Some people had been completely drained of blood. At that moment, Magdalena was about to leave when she remembered her younger brother, Kai. Her task had been to take care of Kai, but in the end, she lost him. This was also why she did not want to return there anymore. As Magdalena boarded the train, she reminisced about the past while looking outside. At that moment, a strange figure appeared. A boy who resembled Kai was standing outside, looking at Magdalena. Meanwhile, a dismembered corpse suddenly came to life. The police quickly took this person to the hospital for emergency treatment. Through the efforts of the doctors, the victim regained a bit of consciousness, but due to a torn mouth, he could not speak. Zajac wanted the victim to write down any clues that could help the police solve the case, but when the victim took the pen, he only drew strange symbols on the paper. The police couldn't understand what these symbols meant, and before they could ask further, the victim passed away right there on the hospital bed. Meanwhile, after Magdalena thought she had seen Kai at the train station, she got off the train and headed back to the village. 20 years ago, she had witnessed her younger brother's body with her own eyes. How could someone who looked so similar to him appear now, unless the person who died 20 years ago wasn't her brother? Without hesitation, Magdalena dug up Kai's grave. The police were currently conducting DNA tests on the bodies in the pile, and if Kai's DNA matched, Magdalena would believe that she had been mistaken. So, she took a bone sample, and while her colleagues were changing shifts in the forensic lab, she quietly took one of their ID cards. Disguising herself in a protective suit, she headed to the scene. This remote area had the only equipment capable of quickly testing DNA, so she placed the sample in a box, believing the results would come soon. However, as Magdalena left, she noticed a crowd gathered around a tent, obscuring the pile of bodies. Something unusual seemed to be happening. Magdalena sneaked inside and discovered that beneath the pile of bodies, there was a metal door, a secret passage. Fearing possible danger, the police sent in an armed SWAT team, equipped with cameras, to investigate. As they ventured deeper, they found a vast cave. Strangely, the ground was covered with skeletons, and it was impossible to tell whether they were human or animal remains. When the SWAT team turned on their lights, they discovered a glass jar containing a liquid with a leech inside. Magdalena, seeing the scene through the screen, was utterly stunned. She knew what it meant, but she hadn't had time to think it through yet. Roland noticed the change in Magdalena's expression, so she quickly left the scene. After all, she was no longer a police officer and didn't have the authority to enter a restricted area. If she were caught, she would be in trouble. Despite Magdalena being very careful, Roland still noticed her actions. As Magdalena was both a friend and a colleague of Roland, he didn't report her immediately. Instead, he sent her a message asking what had happened. Since the National Security Bureau took this case very seriously, Roland didn't want Magdalena to make any mistakes. Magdalena hesitated for a moment when she received the message, but in the end, she called Roland back. They agreed to meet. When Roland arrived, Magdalena explained that her reason for acting this way was because she suspected her younger brother, Kai, might still be alive. If the body in the grave really was Kai's, the DNA results would match the bodies at the scene the next day. But if it wasn't Kai, then those who had faked her brother's death must have been involved in something suspicious. Moreover, these people were none other than Magdalena's father and Roland's father, since it was Roland's father who had been in charge of the case back then. Magdalena didn't want to know what secrets Roland's father and her own father were hiding. She only wanted to know whether Kai was truly dead or not. All she had to do now was wait for the DNA results the following day. Roland, upon learning of this, didn't push Magdalena any further and drove off. Perhaps he, too, wanted to know whether Kai was alive or dead. The next day, when the DNA test results had not yet come back, an anonymous tipster reported that there was a man named Paul in the village who might be connected to the case. Paul had participated in World War II and still kept weapons, so Zajac and Roland went to Paul's house. Zajac searched outside while Roland entered the house. Although Roland had met Paul when he was young, he didn't know much about that person. Upon entering, Roland was shocked to see numerous gas masks and, in addition, a skinned rabbit. Before Roland could react, a gun was suddenly pressed to his head. Meanwhile, Zajac discovered a hand buried underground, which immediately made him think of the pile of bodies. He quickly called for backup and ran inside the house. At that moment, Paul said something strange to Roland. Paul asked Roland if he was one of the people's accomplices. Roland didn't understand what Paul meant. Paul continued, saying that Roland's father had listened to them. Wasn't Roland sent by them to kill him? Paul became increasingly unhinged. Just then, Zajac appeared with a weapon in hand. Under the intense confrontation between the two men, Roland explained that he was currently an inspector with the National Security Bureau, and that he wasn't on anyone's side. Even if his father was connected to the bodies, Roland would have no hesitation in arresting him. With Roland's calming words, Paul finally surrendered. After Paul was arrested, Roland went to the scene to meet with his forensic colleagues. The DNA test results had come in, and Roland wanted to know if the DNA from Kai in case number 97 had any matches. However, his colleague shook his head and said there was no match. Upon hearing this, Roland felt that this case was far more complicated than he had initially thought. If there was no DNA from Kai, then Magdalena's speculation was likely correct, meaning that case number 97 had issues. Regardless of the situation, Roland knew he had to share this news with Magdalena. She had been following the scene from a distance, and upon hearing the news, Magdalena became somewhat agitated. She was certain she hadn't been mistaken, which meant that Kai was still alive. Now, no matter what, Magdalena had to find Kai and uncover the truth behind why he had faked his death and why he had never returned to his family. Magdalena instructed Roland to go speak with his father, since he had been in charge of the case back then, while she began her search for Kai. She went to the place where Kai used to play as a child. Descending into a cave, although Kai was not there, she did discover a glass jar on the ground, identical to the one in the cave at the farm. She then remembered that Kai had always liked using glass jars to keep leeches when they were kids. Kneeling down, she started digging, and soon uncovered an iron box. When she opened it, inside was a gun. Magdalena remembered that the gun was a gift from Paul when she was a child, and she had later given it to Kai. While this further confirmed Magdalena's suspicions, she searched everywhere and still couldn't find any trace of Kai. Magdalena began to wonder if she had been mistaken after all. Feeling helpless, she decided to turn to Roland, hoping that she could uncover the truth from his father. But Roland wanted to speak privately first. Once inside the house, Roland smashed the television in front of his father. The retired police officer's father, whom he was very proud of, was connected to case number 97. Roland felt utterly devastated. Magdalena heard Roland's furious shout and rushed inside to calm him down, urging him to stay composed. Roland's father seemed to know that the truth could no longer be hidden, so he quietly stepped outside. A moment later, he walked in holding a box and said that he had not dared to take it out before, fearing that the two of them would not be able to live long. But after all these years, he would rather die than live in lies and pain. Roland didn't understand why this matter had caused such fear in his father, but together with Magdalena, he opened the box. Inside, there was a tape and a detailed investigation report of case number 97. When they played the tape, it showed Roland's father interrogating Paul. Paul said that he had seen Kai with his own eyes. The drowned person wasn't him. He questioned why the police were cooperating with these people. After saying this, Paul seemed to realize something and became very agitated. After watching the footage, Magdalena was absolutely certain that Kai was still alive. To find Kai, she snuck into her parents' house. If anyone knew where Kai was, it would be her parents. But why had they kept this secret from her? Magdalena knew her parents didn't like her, so she took the gun and confronted her mother, asking where Kai was. Her mother recalled that Magdalena had used this gun to injure her father when she was little. Under Magdalena's questioning, her mother finally pointed to a location on the map and described it. However, this place was within the borders of Poland, making it somewhat complicated to reach. Magdalena didn't want Roland to come with her, so in a desperate situation, she turned to a friend for help. A man named Adrian, who was paralyzed, had a younger cousin named Marek, who was very good at Polish. Magdalena hoped to go there with Marek. After Adrian agreed, Magdalena and Marek drove to the designated location. After 6 hours of travel, they reached the spot that Magdalena's mother had mentioned. Upon entering, Magdalena saw a puddle of blood, so she took her gun for protection and carefully went up to the second floor. Suddenly, she noticed a rug under the bed. Since Kai had loved to hide under the bed when he was little, Magdalena thought Kai might be there. Suddenly, someone shot at Magdalena, but fortunately, she managed to dodge the bullet. Carefully, Magdalena looked up and she then discovered a man wearing a mask and holding a weapon rushing toward her. As the man got closer, Magdalena ran outside, but as she fled the house, she was shot in the abdomen. Just as the man was about to kill Magdalena, a mysterious figure suddenly jumped down from the upper floor, took down the man, and carried Magdalena away. When the mysterious person set Magdalena down, she was utterly shocked to find that it was Kai. Although Magdalena had mentally prepared herself, she still found it hard to believe. Moreover, it was strange that Kai looked just the same as he had 20 years ago, which didn't make any sense. To clarify the truth, Magdalena asked Kai what had happened over the years. Kai didn't hide anything and slowly told the story's process. He reminded Magdalena of the time she shot their father 20 years ago. Back then, they were still young and had been playing in the woods with Roland and Adrian. Because this area had experienced war, many soldiers had died, so it was easy to come across bones and various weapons. That day, they stumbled upon a skeleton. Adrian, being brave, went up to inspect a grenade found with the skeleton. He threw it towards Roland, who caught it, his face filled with fear. Magdalena, curious, picked it up to play with and even showed it to Kai. At that moment, Adrian yelled to scare everyone. Although it was just a joke, Roland shouted at him not to do that. But Adrian, unfazed, called Roland a coward. These words made Roland angry and he stormed off. Magdalena looked at Adrian and also decided to leave, but they hadn't gotten far when the grenade exploded, blowing Adrian away. When they turned back, they found that Adrian had lost both his legs and was unconscious. Roland and Magdalena quickly treated the wound simply and took Adrian back to the village to seek help. After the three of them left, Kai, curious about the blood on the ground, walked over to investigate. Not long after Roland and Magdalena brought Adrian home, they realized that Kai was missing. Fearing that Kai might be in danger, Magdalena hurriedly returned to the forest. However, when she arrived, she was stunned by the scene before her. Kai's actions terrified Magdalena. Although she didn't understand why Kai was behaving that way, she approached him and hugged him to comfort him. At that moment, Arthur also ran over. When he saw Kai's mouth covered in blood, he suddenly became enraged. Ignoring Magdalena's pleas, Arthur pulled Kai back home and grabbed a knife, preparing to stab him. To save her brother, Magdalena shot their father. Although Arthur did not die, his attitude was incomprehensible to Magdalena. Even if Kai drank blood, it didn't justify Arthur wanting to kill his son. Magdalena even suspected that Kai might have some infectious disease that caused him to lose his sanity. So, she threatened Arthur to take Kai to the hospital for an examination. Arthur did not react angrily to Magdalena's actions, but appeared to have something difficult to say. Ultimately, to reassure Magdalena, Arthur took Kai to the hospital. After the examination, the doctors found no signs of illness in Kai. They only diagnosed his strange behavior as depression, suggesting that he might be seeking attention from others. Magdalena asked the doctor how to treat it, and the doctor recommended that the family get a pet for Kai. Having a pet nearby might yield positive results. Thus, Kai got his first pet. They thought life would change for the better, but unexpectedly, after that incident, Arthur's attitude toward Kai changed significantly. He constantly monitored Kai's every behavior and gesture. It seemed that as soon as Kai showed even a hint of bloodlust, Arthur would immediately beat him. What was even stranger was that during that time, there was always a person in black standing near their house. Every time this happened, Arthur would take a gun and go out to chase the person away. At first, Magdalena and Kai didn't know who the person in black was, but when an event occurred that completely changed Kai's life, they got their answer. The event was when Kai had a conflict with a classmate, and in his anger, he punched the classmate's face so badly it was crushed. Magdalena was there and witnessed this scene, and she fainted from fear. What was strange was that the classmate's parents didn't press any charges, but from then on, Kai couldn't control his bloodlust. Every night, he would secretly go out to hunt rabbits to drink their blood. On one occasion, as Kai was about to drink the blood, the person in black suddenly appeared. The person in black had no ill intentions, but said something that confused Kai greatly. The person said that although they didn't know each other, their fathers had once visited a tribe, and that both of them were the few remaining heirs of that tribe. Later, Kai's father had betrayed the tribe because of his wife, and now he wanted to control Kai. The person in black said that they understood what it felt like to not be able to control the bloodlust, and therefore didn't want Kai to live like his father, relying on animal blood. He said that relying on animal blood wouldn't keep them alive for long, and only human blood could slow down their aging process. The person in black offered to help Kai, but warned him not to let Arthur know. Later, Kai told Magdalena that after some time, he chose not to join the person in black, and instead, he continued to satisfy his bloodlust with animal blood. However, many years later, the person in black brought his father to Kai. The father of the person in black said that their tribe was on the brink of extinction, and that no female members of their kind had appeared in over 100 years. So whether Kai agreed or not, the father would still force Kai to come to their territory. He even told Kai that he and Arthur had once been very good friends. In the past, they used to leave the corpses of both humans and animals in caves beneath the farm. Now, beneath the farm, there were many skeletons. He wanted Kai to be able to use this place in the future. Then, he said that Arthur had the purest bloodline, a bloodline known as good blood. He believed that Kai would also inherit this bloodline, so he hoped Kai could harness it. After hearing this, Kai immediately understood the meaning behind the words of the person in black's father. Harnessing it didn't mean killing people and drinking blood, did it? But Kai didn't want to do that, so he turned and tried to run away. However, he didn't get far before being pulled back. The father of the person in black said that Kai was about to come of age, and only Kai could become the heir. Furthermore, he promised that if Kai joined them, he would not harm Kai's family. In the end, he handed Kai a book, which only those from the tribe could understand. He hoped that once Kai returned, he could learn about his tribe. In 1997, the Oder River flooded, and Kai's secret base face was submerged, making him furious. The lack of blood for many days had made him extremely uncomfortable. When Magdalena became a police officer and went to find Kai, she only saw his strange complexion. The pet dog had died in a pool of blood. Magdalena thought Kai's illness had relapsed and tried to wake him, but as a result, Kai pushed her away forcefully. Kai turned and tried to run away. Magdalena lost track of her younger brother, and 2 weeks later, when she found him again, Kai had turned into a corpse. Now, Kai was alive and standing before Magdalena, which proved that Arthur also knew Kai was still alive but had chosen to hide it. Magdalena asked Kai what had happened afterward. Kai continued, telling her that after he pushed Magdalena down away and ran off, he encountered an elderly couple trapped in the floodwaters. They were carrying luggage, preparing to leave, and seeing Kai in a pitiful state, they thought he had lost his family and wanted to take him with them. However, as they gathered their things, Kai caught the scent of blood and lost control. He drowned the old man, then took a knife and cut his skin to drink the blood. Kai even callously did the same to the elderly woman. Afterward, Kai drove away with 2 corpses, and the 3 of them were the 3 missing persons in case number 97. Later, Arthur had faked Kai's body, which was why Magdalena had been deceived for over 20 years. After leaving the house, Kai, relying on his memory, found his way to a wooden cabin located between the border of Germany and Poland. When he was young, Kai had often visited this place with a friend named Marcin. Although Marcin was Polish, the 2 of them had shared a beautiful friendship there. After some time, Kai left home and lived in that cabin. He tried going outside to hunt people in order to satisfy his bloodlust. Afterward, he would hide the bodies in the trunk of his car, then drive back to his family's farm. The father of the person in black had given Kai the key to the basement, as if he had already anticipated Kai's choice. And Kai had indeed become addicted to drinking human blood. He hid all the victims' bodies in the basement. Kai had also seen various bodies killed by Arthur and the father of the person in black there. Since the farm had stopped being used for farming and Kai often acted at night, he believed his parents would never find out. This went on for 20 years, until one day, Marcin, now an adult, returned to the cabin to reminisce about the past. As a result, they found Kai here. Because he often drank human blood, Kai's body aged slowly. Although it was hard to believe, Marcin still recognized Kai. Even though he didn't know what Kai had been through, Marcin kindly took him home. They shaved Kai's beard and cut his hair. Marcin often took Kai out to the lake to fish, wanting him to return to a normal life. However, Kai's bloodlust had become uncontrollable. When Marcin returned, he saw Kai looking extremely remorseful, and his wife had been killed in a pool of blood. Enraged, Marcin wanted to take revenge for his wife, but seeing Kai's remorseful tears made him realize that he had indirectly caused his wife's death. In despair, he shot himself, wanting to escape from life. Marcin was the victim who had woken up among the corpses. After hearing this story from Kai, Magdalena felt utterly devastated. Although she was very glad that Kai was still alive, her brother had become a bloodthirsty monster, something she could not accept. She couldn't even believe that Kai had killed so many people. To prove whether Kai's words were true, Magdalena cut her palm, wanting to see if Kai truly craved blood. To her surprise, when Kai saw the blood, he showed an intense desire for it. However, he then smashed the cup. After calming down, Kai said that since Marcin's death, he hadn't drunk human blood for a long time. Even if the mysterious people knew, the worst that could happen was that he would die. But Magdalena's presence had disrupted Kai's plans. He warned her that once those mysterious people couldn't find him, they certainly wouldn't spare her. Therefore, Kai advised Magdalena not to investigate any further and to leave quickly. Magdalena asked Kai if he had seen the faces of those mysterious people. How could he not know who they were after such a long time? Kai replied that he truly didn't know anything about them because they were very mysterious. Reluctantly, Magdalena comforted Kai, saying that she would find a way to catch those mysterious people and help him return to a normal life. Over here, Zajac on his own found a house in a remote area and discovered that Roland had a complicated relationship with many people in the village. He decided to uncover the truth about this village and the pile of corpses. Sure enough, after investigating the old records, Zajac found many clues. Magdalena sought Roland out because he was in great distress over his father's actions in case 97. The two had once been close friends and even had a period of being in love. So, Magdalena advised him to pull himself together, but she didn't mention anything about Kai to Roland, even though Roland also suspected that Kai was still alive. Roland then shared with her that when he was a child, a mysterious person had visited his house. His mother seemed to want to keep him from knowing, so she took him down to the basement, but Roland still overheard his father arguing with this mysterious person. At the time, he didn't understand why. Later, his mother passed away, and Roland noticed that his father had changed significantly. In hindsight, Roland thought that perhaps his father had made an agreement with these people to protect him. He even suspected that his mother had been killed by this mysterious person. No matter what, Roland was determined to find this person. After saying goodbye to Roland, Magdalena went back to her parents' house. Seeing the police monitoring her parents, she decided not to disturb them and quietly went inside to ask her mother about her suspicions. She asked her mother how she knew where Kai was, why her parents had concealed the fact that Kai was still alive, and why did they hate her, causing her to leave her homeland for 20 years. She also asked who the mysterious person was that Kai had mentioned. Magdalena was certain that her father knew something. She even suspected that her parents were accomplices with them. She posed a series of questions, which made Arthur extremely angry. He stormed over and grabbed Magdalena by the throat. After her mother intervened, Arthur let her go. He then told her to stop investigating, or she would end up dead. With that, he stormed upstairs. After calming down, Magdalena quietly picked up a glass of water from the table, which was filled with fresh blood. At the same time, Zajac was investigating the case, studying the symbols left by the victims in the pile of corpses. He was separating and then recombining them until a familiar name appeared before him. Meanwhile, this school was very peculiar. It only accepted orphans with nowhere else to go, offering free meals and not charging any tuition fees. However, there was one condition. Every student had to donate blood every month and endure strict management and confinement. Despite this, the orphan children, hoping to change their fate, willingly went there. Ilona, a female student, was one of them. Initially, Ilona had suspected that the boarding school had some ulterior motive, but after being provided with abundant top nutritious food and meeting kind teachers, she no longer had any doubts. However, in reality, this was part of a meticulously planned scheme. From the moment they entered, they had already become targets. On the other side, when hundreds of bodies of people and animals were discovered, the village of Krulo became famous. Not only did the security agencies of Germany and Poland pay attention to it, but also many reporters came there. Although Magdalena knew that many of the bodies were victims of Kai, she believed that this wasn't solely Kai's responsibility. The true culprit behind everything was the mysterious figure who had incited Kai to commit these acts. Only by finding this person could the truth be revealed. Although Arthur knew who the mysterious figure was, he was terrified when confronted by Magdalena's questions. He even told her to leave the village immediately. This made it clear that investigating through her father would be difficult for Magdalena, and she couldn't share these clues with Roland or the police, or else Kai would be arrested right away. Meanwhile, the bloodthirsty cult was still operating in the shadows. As she pondered what to do next, a strange car suddenly stopped by the side of the road, causing Magdalena to look in that direction. A man with a face full of scars looked at her, then driving off. Magdalena recalled that this man's name was August, a student whose face had been severely beaten by Kai. Though August's gaze was confusing to her, she didn't dwell on it, and instead went to find Roland. She wanted to know if there were any clues in the investigation report on the pile of corpses. Roland explained that because the basement was often flooded, the remains had decomposed, making it very difficult to conduct DNA testing to confirm the victims' identities. However, based on the clues found, many of the victims appeared to be reclusive people who had no one to care for them, like vagrants or drug addicts. After sharing this, Roland asked Magdalena if Kai was still alive. Magdalena didn't answer, but asked him for some time. When the opportunity arose, she would reveal everything. As Magdalena left, Zajac watched her. That night, he accidentally managed to piece together the name Kai from the clues. Although he didn't understand why the victims had written this name, he was certain that these people were hiding some kind of secret, including Roland. Zajac even began to doubt whether Roland could be trusted, as there was a lot of information to share that Roland kept to himself. After leaving, Magdalena ventured into the forest to search for Kai. However, she found that her younger brother wasn't there. She went deeper into the forest, hoping to find him nearby. Unexpectedly, she spotted Kai's shirt on the ground. Magdalena had an ominous feeling and quickly searched everywhere. Eventually, she found Kai standing in a river. What was terrifying was that leeches were clinging all over his body. When Kai saw Magdalena, he raised a gun, but luckily, the bullets had gotten wet and wouldn't fire. Magdalena rushed to stop him and pulled him out of the water. Once they returned to the wooden house, Magdalena used a knife to carefully remove the leeches from Kai's body. During this, Kai explained that the leeches helped alleviate his bloodthirst, but they couldn't control it for long. He no longer wanted to keep living and had wanted to die instead. Hearing this, Magdalena became somewhat angry, but she knew that with just the evidence from the pile of corpses, the police would never believe that there were still people living by drinking human blood. She hoped that Kai would stay and help her catch the mysterious figure behind everything, or more people would be harmed. Her words helped Kai regain some clarity. He stood up and took a book in the closet. It was a book that recorded the rules of the cult of the Kim, given to him by the father of the man in the black coat. Perhaps the true identity of the mysterious figure could be found in it. Because his gunshot wound had become infected, Kai helped Magdalena sew it up. The two of them then began speculating about who the real mysterious figure could be. These two people seemed to have a father-son relationship. Magdalena believed that she could investigate people with father-son connections in the village, but before that, she needed to find Marek, the driver who had accompanied her at the time. Marek was also Adrian's cousin, and only Marek knew her whereabouts. The first person who could potentially inform the man in the black coat was likely Marek. Although Magdalena's parents also learned that no matter how much they hated her, they would never report her to the man in black to have her killed. Therefore, finding Marek became Magdalena's priority. Of course, there was another person who needed to be investigated, August, who had appeared not long ago. Although August only glanced at Magdalena, her intuition told her that this person definitely had a problem. Meanwhile, as the two of them were discussing their plan, Roland discovered that his father had taken his own life. This news devastated Roland. He never expected that this event would lead the local police to revoke his right to participate in the investigation of the case. The police suspected that his father's death was connected to the pile of corpses, and there was also the issue of Roland's relationship with Magdalena. It wasn't just a simple friendship between them, they had a deeper connection. Moreover, Magdalena's father was under suspicion by the police. After considering all the information, the police had no choice but to temporarily suspend Roland's position. Surrounded by reporters, Roland quickly left the scene of the corpses. He knew that his father's death was connected to the investigation, but he had promised Magdalena that he wouldn't reveal anything about Kai for the time being, so he had to endure the pain alone. Roland drove to a secluded place to release his emotions. At that moment, Magdalena called Adrian to ask about Marek's whereabouts, but Adrian hadn't seen Marek in a long time. So, Natri, based on the information Adrian had given, went to Marek's house. After knocking for a while with no answer, Magdalena had no choice but to climb through the window. She intended to search for any clues inside. Not long after, she discovered a large number of photos of teenagers in a file bag, along with several samples of blood. Magdalena couldn't understand why there were these things in Marek's house, but she had heard that he had worked at a school before. So, she used the address in the files to track down the school. Upon arriving, she realized that it was a private, closed-off school. Since she couldn't get inside, Magdalena circled around the school. Unexpectedly, an elderly man who was repairing a car criticized her, telling her that that place was private land and that she should leave immediately. Meanwhile, Ilona, inside the school, accidentally found an abandoned attic. She had no idea she would overhear a strange secret there. Ilona peered down and saw two people arguing fiercely. One of them sounded very much like the principal. She overheard the principal angrily telling the man in black that the two of them had ruined everything there. Now, the whole world was watching this place. To keep the tribe from being discovered, the principal hoped they could quickly bring an end to everything. He then told the man in black that the higher-ups in the tribe had found a remote area in India for them to settle in. Once everything was handled, they could go there. The man in black was extremely agitated when he heard this. He told the principal that he and his father had been doing business there for decades, and that the boy was their only chance to change their fate. He and his father were determined not to leave that place. The argument between the two sides grew increasingly heated. Ilona saw everything, but couldn't understand what they were talking about. On the other side, after Magdalena learned about Roland's father, she immediately went to his house. She had originally planned to comfort him, but to her surprise, Roland told her that the police had revoked his authority to investigate the case. Not only had he lost his father, but now he couldn't help her with anything either. Roland intended to leave, but before he did, he told Magdalena that what he needed wasn't comfort, but an apology. With that, Roland turned and walked away. As Roland was about to leave, Magdalena suddenly spoke up, telling him that their child was still alive, and that it was a daughter. However, since giving birth to the child, Magdalena had never seen her. She only knew that her daughter was living with foster parents in Zurich. Magdalena's words brought back memories for Roland. It turned out that 20 years ago, they had been in love, and even more surprisingly, Magdalena had been pregnant. The two of them had sworn to leave the village and start a new life elsewhere, but because of Case 97, finally they were forced to part ways. What Roland could not forget was that Magdalena had once told him she had aborted their child, and that was the reason he had left the village and never returned. Even though Magdalena had now revealed the truth, it was too late. Roland could not bring himself to forgive her. He was determined to drive away. Magdalena begged and apologized, but eventually, Roland stopped the car. He got into the car and asked the girl what her name was. Magdalena answered that the girl's name was Valea. After a moment of reflection, Magdalena shared some of the clues she had uncovered during her investigation, but she did not tell him that Kai was still alive. Magdalena said that someone was manipulating the case involving the pile of bodies, and it was likely the son of the second suspect in the 1947 case. The first suspect, however, was Magdalena's father, but since so much time had passed, no one knew the identity of the person involved. Although Magdalena's parents knew, they would not cooperate. Roland thought for a moment and then said that there might be someone who had had contact with the 1947 case. Guided by Roland, the two of them went to a mansion in the town. It was said that an old man lived there, someone born around the same time as Magdalena's father. Perhaps they could find some clue there. As they were about to enter the mansion, while Magdalena was not paying attention, Roland quietly installed a tracking device on her car. After that, the two of them went to meet the old man, who was bedridden. Under Roland's questioning, the old man revealed that in 1947, there had been a flood in Oderbruch. Two bodies had been washed ashore, and some suspected they had drowned, while others believed they had been murdered. There were even suspicions that the killers were two men from Romania, but due to a lack of evidence, the case had to be closed. Magdalena asked who the two two Romanians were. The old man said he only knew one of them had been living in the village of Krulo and had later changed his name, something like Arthur. Upon hearing this, Magdalena quickly asked about the other person. The old man thought for a moment and replied that he didn't know, because the other person was very mysterious, always wearing a hat, seemingly unwilling to let anyone know his true identity. However, there were some rumors, though no one knew who had heard them, saying they were war criminals. After saying this, the old man suddenly began coughing violently. The nurse beside him advised them not to ask any more questions. With that, they left the mansion, still filled with doubts. The two of them went their separate ways to investigate. On this side, Zajac, following the clues he had gathered, went to find Paul. Zajac showed Paul a photo of Arthur and asked if the man in the picture was the old hunter. Paul replied that it wasn't. Zajac then took out the photo of Kai and asked if this was the young hunter. Upon seeing the photo, Paul became agitated and nodded in response. At that moment, Zajac was completely certain that the hunter in the photo was the Kai who had died. But Paul insisted that Kai wasn't dead. If that were the case, it meant that Kai was likely still alive. Although they didn't know who the old hunter was, it was clear that the person had something to do with the pile of bodies case. At that point, Zajac still had no idea that the old hunter was the mysterious figure that Magdalena was investigating. Meanwhile, Alona, who was at school, suddenly saw a car stop outside the school gate. A couple got out of the car, and Alona, curious, went up to the attic. Through a small crack, she saw the couple talking to the headmaster. The old man appeared to be pleading with the headmaster to spare his daughter, but because his wife was present, the headmaster said he wouldn't discuss the matter in front of her. Reluctantly, the old man told his wife to wait outside. Once the wife left, the two men began their conversation. The headmaster told the old man that it was his son who had caused the current situation. Even the headmaster had lost his position within the tribe because of it. Magdalena's personality was not under the control of the principal, but rather in the hands of the old man's son. The headmaster explained that the old man's daughter now carried the strongest bloodline in the tribe. He told the old man that if he handed over Kai, he could protect his daughter. Unexpectedly, the old man, upon hearing this, replied that he had no idea where Kai was. In response, the headmaster said that their meeting was a risky one and ultimately meaningless. Afterward, the headmaster told the old man to leave and never return. The next morning, Magdalena with Kai traveled to Romania. After searching through many documents, they prepared to look for the war criminal information that the old man had mentioned. They knew that these details could only be known by veterans of World War II. So, Kai tirelessly searched for information about the veterans. Once Magdalena had gathered enough information, she went from person to person asking about it. However, even though she showed pictures of Arthur at different ages, no one recognized him, let alone had any information about the other mysterious person. There was, however, an old man who promised to help Magdalena by asking one of his friends. So, Magdalena and Kai had no choice but to stay in Romania for a few more days. During this time, Kai relied on the animal blood that Magdalena had bought for him to suppress his thirst for blood. But by now, the blood was all gone. Without any useful information, they would have to return home. Just as the two of them were feeling discouraged, a loud knock echoed at the door. When they opened it, they saw the old man's son standing there. He said someone knew the information that Magdalena had been looking for, but she would need to go with him to a certain place. Magdalena, without any suspicion, immediately agreed and went with Kai to follow him to a tower. However, once they entered, they were told that only Magdalena could meet the person with the information. After entering, a blind old woman asked Magdalena if she knew what a war criminal was. Magdalena replied that she didn't know. The old woman then explained that war criminals were deserters who had been captured during World War II. She then asked Magdalena why she wanted to find them. Magdalena could only explain that one of them was her father. Upon hearing this, the old woman told Magdalena to raise her hand. Though she didn't know why, Magdalena complied. The old woman sniffed her hand and asked what she knew about her father. Magdalena didn't understand what the old woman meant, but she answered that she knew very little. The old woman didn't explain further, only saying that the less one knew, the better. Then, the old woman began telling what she knew. It turned out that back then, Magdalena's father and another man had been captured after losing a battle and became prisoners of war. But while they were being taken captive, they had managed to escape. This event had caused a stir in the Ministry of Defense, and a reward had been offered publicly for their capture. For various reasons, even though the old woman had met them before, it had been so long that she had forgotten what they looked like. To identify them now, she would need to find the newspaper from that time. The old woman said she would ask someone to help search for it. She then told Kai to come in. Like Magdalena, the old woman sniffed Kai's hand. To her surprise, the old woman became agitated and immediately ordered Kai to leave. It seemed that she had smelled the scent of fresh blood on him. At the same time, Zajac had found Roland. Zajac wanted to know where Magdalena was, and this time, Roland didn't hide anything. He told Zajac everything. Roland also admitted that he had installed a tracking device on Magdalena's car, but the signal suddenly disappeared. Roland suspected that she had gone out of the tracking range. Seeing this, Zajac also revealed his secret. He took Roland to his secret base and then shared the clues he had gathered. It turned out that that the pile of bodies case was not the only strange case Zajac had encountered. In 2007, while investigating the case of a missing boy, Zajac had accidentally discovered many skeletons in a cave near a village in Siberia. These skeletons closely resembled those in the pile of bodies case, with most of them having been drained of blood. According to the local people's descriptions and Zajac's own speculations, there seemed to be a cult that survived by drinking human blood. After that, Zajac started paying attention to similar cases. To his surprise, these kinds of incidents weren't limited to Siberia. In India, Malaysia, Brazil, and many other countries, there had been similar cases. The places where these bodies were discovered were often remote and isolated. In particular, in Mexico in 1977, 22 bodies had been found under a fountain. Fortunately, the police had managed to narrow down a suspect. However, when they tried to capture him, that person had a strength greater than that of an ordinary human. Combining these analyses, Zajac had uncovered a special symbol. No matter what this symbol meant, he believed that such terrifying cases were occurring all over the world. Zajac then told Roland the information he had found about Kai. Now Zajac suspected that not only was Kai still alive, but he was also a member of this cult. Zajac hoped that Roland could help him find Magdalena, and through her, track down Kai. Only Kai, Zajac believed, could unravel the true mystery of the pile of bodies. On Magdalena's side, she had no new leads, so she decided to take Kai back to the village. To prevent Kai from being detected by the police, Magdalena took him to Adrian's house. Magdalena lied to Adrian, telling him that Kai was a distant cousin. Although Adrian was curious about why Kai looked so much like him, Magdalena didn't say anything, so Adrian didn't press the matter. After arranging everything for Kai, Magdalena asked Adrian to inform her immediately if he received any information about Marek. She also warned him not to tell anyone about this. After saying that, she got in the car and drove away. Unexpectedly, Roland followed her tracking route. Then he got inside and took out handcuffs. He asked Magdalena if Kai was still alive, and if the culprit behind the pile of corpses was Kai. Magdalena didn't know where Roland had gotten this information, but she still explained that the mastermind was someone else. Now, she had to find a man named August, the one with the scar. If Roland agreed, they could investigate together. However, she promised that once she found the answers she was seeking, she would no longer hide the secret about Kai. After thinking for a moment, Roland agreed. He also knew August. He was the one who had been beaten up by Kai, his face crushed from the punch. Later, the two of them found August at a farm. Magdalena suspected that August might be the person in the black coat. The distinctive feature of the person in the black coat was missing some fingers, so Magdalena threatened August to put down the hammer and take off his gloves. August seemed to be very afraid of Magdalena. He threw the hammer to the ground and then took off his gloves. When Magdalena saw his 10 intact fingers, she eliminated him as a suspect. However, August suddenly became agitated and said that he hadn't told anyone. He begged Magdalena to spare him. Magdalena didn't understand what he meant. August then asked if she didn't remember anything. He reminded her that when he had bullied Kai, it had been Magdalena who had punched his face to pieces. As August recounted the events from the past, memories flooded back into Magdalena's mind. She then returned home to her parents. She poured out her mother's wine, and the blood-like liquid dripped onto the table. At that moment, she finally understood. It turned out that her entire family were bloodthirsty monsters. Seeing her reaction, her parents approached her, trying to comfort her. Arthur slowly began to tell the whole story. It turned out that Magdalena also carried the strongest bloodline in their tribe. However, she had never had the thirst for blood, and because their tribe hadn't had a female member for over 100 years, the others had been searching for or attempting to create a female member to continue their bloodline. To protect Magdalena from being discovered, her family had to make sacrifices, and Kai's sacrifice had been the greatest. From a young age, Kai had shouldered the responsibility of protecting Magdalena. Now, their family had only Magdalena left, the one who could still lead a normal life. Therefore, Arthur hoped that Magdalena would stop her investigation. The only way to escape danger was to leave this place quickly, and most importantly, not to drink any blood. Magdalena didn't say anything. She silently left the house. She sent the images she had found at Marek's house to Roland, and Roland showed them to Zajac. Based on the images, the two of them identified a girl who appeared in the pile of bodies. As a result, Marek was temporarily placed on the suspect list. In Zajac's report, the police decided to raid Marek's house and investigate the school. When the special forces arrived at their position, the police stormed into Marek's house. Although he had been gone for a long time, the special forces discovered a tunnel. They cut open the cover of the tunnel, only to find that it was a team that had just opened the tunnel. The house immediately exploded. Clearly, someone had anticipated that the police would come. Seeing this, the police immediately ordered caution, and they had to quickly move to the school to ensure the safety of the students. Unbeknownst to the police, by the time they began their operation, the school had already given each student a bottle of special milk. After Ilona had overheard strange conversations, she had been cautious. She then told her friend not to drink it and poured the milk onto the ground. Meanwhile, the others, after drinking the milk, suddenly started coughing violently. After that, they lay motionless. Seeing this, Ilona hurriedly ran away. Once the teacher confirmed that all the students had collapsed, their true nature was revealed. One of them, holding a weapon, began to inspect the scene. Unexpectedly, there was another survivor besides Ilona. Since the school was locked down, Ilona had nowhere else to run. As she waited desperately for death, a voice suddenly spoke beside her. A man in black told her that if she helped him get a bag of blood, he would take her with him once he got out. Ilona, lacking any strong will, ran to the infirmary, took a bag of blood, and then poured it through the crack in the door. The man in black bent down and licked up the blood. Not long after, he kicked the door, which quickly burst open. The man in black walked out, only glancing at Ilona before leaving. His right hand held a hat and was missing several fingers. It turned out he was the very person Magdalena had been searching for. Having been locked up here due to a conflict with the principal, Ilona thought he would fulfill his promise to take her away. But unexpectedly, after he got outside, he locked the door tightly, calmly watching as Ilona was strangled to death by the person inside. By the time the police arrived, everyone, including Ilona, had been killed. Fortunately, a friend of Ilona's survived, but she did not dare to show herself again, and could only leave in fear. At that time, the police suspected Marek was involved in the case of the pile of corpses, but since he had disappeared, they had to search Adrian's house. After all, Marek often took care of Adrian, which was why Kai almost got discovered. Fortunately, he was hiding in the attic and went unnoticed. When the officer in charge wanted to ask for more information, Marek suddenly called Adrian. The officer quickly signaled for Adrian not to let Marek know the police were there. Adrian followed the instructions. Marek said he needed money and asked Adrian to bring it to the mining site to meet him in half an hour. After getting this information, everyone rushed to the mine. They needed to catch Marek. Even Roland and Magdalena also ambushed in wait nearby. As the police team took their positions, everyone waited for Marek to fall into the trap. However, after sitting and waiting for half the day, Marek still didn't show up. Had he sensed something unusual and decided not to come? At that moment, Magdalena received a message from the Romanian old woman asking someone to send her a photo of the newspaper. It contained information about 2 deserters. What surprised Magdalena was that the mysterious person she had been desperately searching for was her friend Adrian. Perhaps worried for Roland's safety, Magdalena chose not to tell him and quietly drove back to Adrian's house, since Kai was still there. But Magdalena's frantic actions caught Roland's attention. When she returned to Adrian's house, it was already dark, but she searched for a long time and couldn't find anyone. It wasn't until her figure appeared on the surveillance camera that a secret passage opened. It seemed that Adrian wanted Magdalena to enter. Without hesitation, and in order to save Kai, Magdalena went in. Inside the tunnel, Marek and Kai were both tied up. From Marek's account, Magdalena learned that he wasn't Adrian, but Adrian's father. His name was Demko. Years ago, after Adrian lost his legs, Demko had someone take him away, while Demko himself had not aged due to drinking blood year after year. To cover up his true identity, Demko had been living under Adrian's name. As for the man in black, he was another son of Demko. Marek wasn't Demko's cousin, as he had claimed, but an orphan, whom Demko had adopted from the school and used as a source of food for all this time. Just in the end, Marek sided with the principal, locking up Demko's son. As punishment, Marek would be killed that very night. The one responsible for the conflict between Demko and the principal was none other than Kai. Demko had worked hard for many years to build his business there, only to have it exposed by the smell of the bodies. The principal, wanting to shirk responsibility, had blamed Demko and his son. However, Demko did not care. As long as Kai was still captured by him, he could move elsewhere and continue to grow his tribe even stronger. At that moment, when Kai heard these things, Magdalena was suddenly captured by the man in black. After tying her to a chair, Magdalena asked where Adrian really was. Demko bluntly stated that Adrian had disappointed him too much. Useless people could only be discarded, just like Magdalena, who was no longer of any value, meaning she would have to die. After saying this, Demko stood behind Marek and broke his neck. Then he prepared to kill Magdalena. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Roland burst in. He had a feeling that Magdalena was in danger, so he followed the tracking device to find her, and it just so happened that he arrived at the scene at that moment. Magdalena urged Roland to shoot quickly because the man was not Adrian. However, Roland had not yet reacted when a sharp knife pierced his chest. It turned out the man in black had stabbed him while he was distracted. Roland had died in such a meaningless way. Demko knew he could not stay long, so he knocked Kai unconscious and put him in a coffin. Then, Demko stabbed Magdalena, wanting her to lose blood slowly and die gradually. After that, Demko pulled the box away from there. Roland lay holding Magdalena's hand and then pulled her down to the ground. Looking at the woman he had once loved, Roland used his last bit of strength to tell Magdalena to drink his blood. Perhaps he realized that she was not an ordinary person, and only this way could she escape. Seeing that Roland was no longer alive, Magdalena broke down and bowed her head to drink his blood. As her pupils changed, a surge of power coursed through her body. When the man in black was about to leave with his belongings, Magdalena blocked his path. The man in black drew his weapon in defense, but as Magdalena approached closer, he instinctively recited the tribe's rule. When their statuses were equal, men could not harm women with stronger bloodlines. He did not expect that a female of their kind, whom they had been desperately searching for hundreds hundreds of years, would suddenly appear here. Magdalena decisively struck the man in black. After he died, Demko saw his son dead at Magdalena's hands and rushed at her in anger. Remember, because Demko's status was higher than Magdalena's, he was not afraid. However, even so, Magdalena, who had never drunk human blood before, possessed immense strength. She repeatedly slammed his head against the wall. After Magdalena took down Demko, she added another shot to kill him. Once she had resolved everything, Magdalena went outside and opened the coffin lid. When Kai saw his sister covered in blood, he immediately knew something had happened. At that moment, two more men in black appeared. They were the principal's men. Magdalena sensed the scent of her kind on them, and to protect Kai, she aimed her gun at the two men in black, threatening them not to come any closer. Then she drove Kai away. Magdalena did not realize that the two men in black were so surprised they stood still, as it was the first time they had seen a female of their kind with such strong blood. After Magdalena left, the two quickly reported the incident. After receiving their orders, they entered the house to destroy the evidence. Although Magdalena had managed to escape with Kai, they would soon face a hunt. It was likely that before long, Magdalena and Roland's daughter would be implicated. Above is the entire content of the movie Oderbruch. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again in the next videos. Bye bye.